My son hadn't spoken in 4 years, a silence I'd spent millions trying to break. Then I overheard his new nanny whisper 2 words: "Your performance," and suddenly, everything I knew was a lie. The silence in my house is a living thing. It's not the peaceful quiet of a library or the serene hush of a cathedral. It's a heavy, oppressive blanket woven from grief and paid for with a fortune. My son Leo is the heart of this silence. He's 8 years old, and he hasn't spoken a single word in 4 years. Not since the accident that took his mother from us and stole the light from his eyes. He is, for all intents and purposes, locked inside himself. My life's purpose, the entire focus of my existence since that day, has been to find the key. I built a software empire from nothing, solving complex problems with logic and code. I thought I could apply the same principles here. If a problem exists, there must be a solution. You just have to find the right expert, the right methodology, the right algorithm. I poured millions into that belief. We've seen the best child psychologists in the world, neurologists who mapped his brain with technology that looks like something out of science fiction. We've tried music therapy, art therapy, equine therapy with the gentlest ponies you've ever seen. I even had a custom-built sensory room installed in our home, a $500,000 sanctuary of soft lights, calming sounds, and varied textures, all designed to gently coax him out of his shell. The results were always the same: nothing. Leo remained a beautiful porcelain doll. His face, a perfect echo of his mother's, was a placid mask. He would sit where you placed him, eat what you fed him, and allow you to dress and bathe him without protest or participation. The doctors called it profound trauma-induced selective mutism, complicated by his cortical visual impairment. He wasn't just blind. His brain couldn't process the signals from his otherwise healthy eyes. He lived in a world of darkness and silence, and every specialist I hired, every dollar I spent, seemed to only build the walls around him higher. The nannies and nurses were a revolving door of crisp uniforms and clinical smiles. They were all highly qualified, with impeccable references and degrees in special needs care. And one by one, they all failed. They treated him like a patient, a delicate case study. They spoke about him in hushed, pitying tones, right in front of him, as if his ears were as useless as his eyes. After the 7th one quit, citing lack of progress and emotional burnout, my agency sent over a file that was different. Her name was Alara. There was no string of degrees after her name. Her experience wasn't in sterile pediatric wards, but in hospices and remote villages in countries I'd never heard of. Her picture showed a woman in her late 50s with kind lines etched around her eyes and a serene expression that felt entirely out of place in my cold, minimalist mansion. I was desperate. I agreed to an interview. When she walked in, the oppressive silence in the house seemed to shift. It thinned out just a little. She didn't gawk at the vaulted ceilings or the museum-quality art on the walls. Her eyes, a startlingly pale gray, found me, and then moved past me, as if searching for something else. "Where is the boy?" she asked. Her voice was low and melodic, like the hum of a cello. I led her to the sensory room, where Leo was sitting on a soft mat, his small hands resting limply in his lap. The previous nanny had left a sound machine playing a loop of synthesized ocean waves. Ilara walked over and switched it off. The sudden return of the heavy silence was jarring to me, but Leo didn't even flinch. Ilara didn't speak to me. She knelt down in front of my son, her movements fluid and unhurried. She didn't touch him, not at first. She simply sat there on the floor with him for a full 10 minutes. I stood awkwardly by the door, feeling like an intruder. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello, Leo," she said. "It's a noisy world, isn't it? Sometimes the quiet is the only safe place." I hired her on the spot. For the next 2 weeks, Alara's methods were as unconventional as her resume. She got rid of the sound machines, the scheduled sensory sessions, the entire rigid structure the therapists had insisted upon. Instead, she just existed in Leo's space. She would hum old folk songs while she tidied his room. She'd bake bread in the kitchen, then bring a warm loaf close to him so he could smell it. She'd sit beside him for hours, not saying a word, just being a quiet, steady presence in his dark world. I saw no breakthroughs, but I did see something. A subtle relaxing of his shoulders when she entered the room. The tiniest tremor in his fingers when she hummed a particular tune. They were breadcrumbs, but I was starving. I started to feel a dangerous flicker of hope. Tonight I was working late in my home office, reviewing quarterly projections that felt utterly meaningless. The audio from Leo's room monitor was on, a habit I couldn't break. Usually it was just the sound of quiet breathing. But tonight I heard Ilara's soft voice. She was putting him to bed. I heard the rustle of sheets, then a long pause. I was about to turn back to my work when she spoke again, her voice so low it was almost consumed by the static. It was a whisper, intimate and secret, not meant for my ears. I leaned closer to the speaker, my breath catching in my throat. She thought she was alone with him. Her words floated through the monitor, each one a perfectly formed ice crystal that pierced straight through my soul. "They all believe you, you know," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial murmur. "Your performance is perfect, but how much longer are you going to keep it up for him?" My blood ran cold. Performance? I stared at the monitor, my mind struggling to process the words. It had to be a mistake, some bizarre turn of phrase. But then, through the speaker, I saw it. On the grainy night vision display, I saw Leo's little hand, the one that hadn't voluntarily moved in 4 years, twitch. And then slowly, deliberately, it reached out and curled its fingers tightly around Ilara's wrist. I stumbled back from my desk, my chair rolling silently on the thick carpet, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a gasp. The world narrowed to the small glowing screen of the monitor. Performance. The word echoed in the cavern of my skull, a ricocheting bullet of pure disbelief. He reached for her. My son, whose hands I had to place around a cup, whose fingers I had to uncurl from a fist he wasn't even aware he was making, had reached for her. It was a conscious, deliberate act. I watched, heart hammering against my ribs, as Ilara gently patted his hand. She didn't look surprised. She looked accustomed to it. She leaned in again, and her voice, a gentle murmur, came through the speaker one last time. "Good night, little actor. Sleep well." Then she stood, smoothed his blanket, and walked out of the room, leaving him in the soft green glow of the night vision camera. I remained frozen for what felt like an eternity. My mind was a maelstrom of confusion and white-hot anger. 4 years. 4 years of my life dedicated to breaking through his walls, and it was all a performance? A lie? I wanted to storm into his room, to shake his small shoulders and demand answers, but the icy calm of Ilara's reaction held me back. They had a secret, a conspiracy of two, being played out under my own roof. If I burst in now, the curtain would drop, the actors would scatter, and I would be left with nothing but the same silence I started with. No. If they were playing a game, then I would learn the rules. I would become a player. The next few days were a special kind of hell. I had to go on as before, the worried, grieving father. I had to discuss Leo's stagnant condition with Ilara, looking her in her serene gray eyes and pretending I didn't see the monstrous secret swimming behind them. Every interaction was a lie. When I asked, "Any change today, Ilara?" and she replied, "He was very calm. The scent of the jasmine I put in his room seemed to soothe him." I had to nod and pretend that was a victory, all the while screaming internally, "What did you two really talk about? What part of the script did you rehearse today?" I became an obsessive spy master in my own home. I had the IT team from my company install micro cameras and high-fidelity audio recorders in every room Leo and Ilara used. It felt like a grotesque violation of my son's privacy. But what choice did I have? I was no longer a father trying to heal his child. I was a man trying to understand his enemy. And I didn't know which one of them was the enemy anymore. The recordings yielded nothing. In my presence, they were the picture of a special needs child and his gentle caregiver. When they were alone, they were silent. Ilara would hum. She would read aloud from books of poetry. Leo would sit, impassive and still. There were no more whispers, no more secret hand-holding. It was as if they knew. The paranoia began to eat at me. Was I the one being played? Was that one whispered conversation just a means to drive me insane? Frustrated, I turned my attention to Alara. Who was she, really? The agency had vetted her, but their checks were standard. I needed more. I hired a private investigator, a former Mossad agent my head of security recommended, a man who could find a ghost if the price was right. I gave him her name and the sparse details from her file. I wanted everything. Her birth certificate, her school records, any known associates, any whisper of a past she had tried to bury. Dig, I told him over an encrypted line. Dig until you hit bone. A week later, while I was sitting in my office, pretending to work and secretly watching a live feed of Alara helping Leo with his lunch, an email notification popped up. The subject line was a single, cryptic number. The case file number the investigator had assigned. I opened it. There was no text, just a single attachment. A scanned photograph, old and slightly faded at the edges. My breath hitched. The photo was of a smiling young couple, standing in front of a small, slightly run-down suburban house. The woman was unmistakably Alara, maybe 30 years younger. Her hair was dark, and she looked happy, vibrant. But it was the man next to her, with his arm slung casually around her shoulder, that made the blood drain from my face. I knew him. I had seen his face in my nightmares every single night for 4 years. It was the face of the drunk driver who had T-boned our car on that rainy afternoon. The man who had taken my wife, my son's sight, and his voice. The man who had died on impact, his face forever seared into my memory. The photograph on my screen seemed to burn with a cold fire, searing its image directly onto my brain. Alara and him, the man who had shattered my world, smiling beside the woman I had entrusted with what was left of it. My first instinct was primal, a surge of adrenaline that made me want to smash my monitor, to find her and scream questions until my throat was raw. But the cold logic that had built my empire took over. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a plan, a meticulously orchestrated infiltration. For what? Money? Revenge? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Alara, or whatever her real name was his wife, or his girlfriend, or his sister. The private investigator's full report was still pending, but this single image was a declaration of war. She was in the house with my son, the son of the man her husband or partner had died killing. Suddenly, her strange methods, her immediate connection with Leo, the whispered conversation, it all took on a sinister new light. Your performance is perfect. Was she coaching him, turning him against me? The thought was a venomous snake coiling in my gut. Was Leo a willing participant in this charade? A blind, mute 8-year-old boy orchestrating a long con with a stranger? It sounded insane. But he had reached for her. He had responded to her. He was her accomplice. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Not until I knew the scope of her game. I needed to see what she did when she thought no one was watching. The cameras had yielded nothing, but maybe I was looking for the wrong thing. I wasn't just observing anymore. I was hunting. That evening I told Alara I had an urgent, all-night business meeting downtown. It was a lie, of course. I drove a few miles away, parked in an anonymous garage, and opened my laptop, connecting to the secure feed from my home. The house was a dollhouse on my screen, a grid of silent, green-tinged rooms. I watched Alara go through the evening routine with Leo dinner, a bath, a story he couldn't see or respond to. It was all maddeningly normal. The perfect nanny. The perfect broken child. She put him to bed, tucked him in, and left his room. I watched her walk down the hallway to her own quarters in the staff wing. I waited. 1 hour. 2. The house was still. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was all some tragic, cosmic coincidence. I was about to pack it in, to go home and face the agonizing uncertainty, when I saw movement on the screen for Leo's room. It wasn't Alara. It was Leo. He sat up in bed. His movements were not the clumsy, uncertain gestures of a blind child. They were fluid, precise. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. My heart stopped. He stood there for a moment, head cocked as if listening, and then he began to walk. He walked, navigating the room with an eerie confidence, his small hands outstretched, but not like a blind person. He wasn't fumbling. He was feeling his way with a practiced ease, his fingers lightly brushing the familiar edges of his dresser, his bookshelf. He was a prisoner pacing his cell. Then he walked to his closet. He opened the door, reached inside, and pulled out a small wooden box. He carried it back to his bed, sat down, and opened it. The camera angle was from above, and I couldn't see what was inside. He just sat there, in the dark, his head bowed over this secret box. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Suddenly a different camera feed lit up with movement. It was Elara, leaving her room. She wasn't in her pajamas. She was still fully dressed. She moved silently down the main corridor, away from Leo's room, towards the heart of my house, my office, my sanctuary, the place where I kept everything of value locked away. I watched, my blood turning to ice, as she stopped outside the heavy oak door. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something. I zoomed in. It was a keycard, not just any keycard. It was a high-level override card, the kind only I and my head of security possessed. She swiped the card. The electronic lock beeped softly, and the door swung open. She slipped inside, closing it behind her. My office, my secrets, my entire life, digitized and stored on servers, accessible from my terminal. What was she looking for? Financial data? Passwords? I felt a surge of panic, followed by a cold, calculating fury. She was a thief, a corporate spy. The whole story about the driver was just leverage, a psychological weapon she intended to use. But then, the camera in Leo's room showed him closing his box, hiding it back in the closet, and climbing back into bed. He lay down and became perfectly still, the broken boy I knew. A moment later, the hallway camera showed my office door opening. Elara stepped out, closing it silently behind her. She didn't appear to be carrying anything. She walked back to her room and disappeared inside. The whole event had taken less than 15 minutes. What did she do? What did she take? I had to know. I raced home, my mind a chaotic mess. I used my own keycard, my hands trembling as I pushed the office door open. Everything looked normal. The papers on my desk were untouched. The Rembrandt on the wall was straight. My computer was in sleep mode. I rushed over and woke it up. I ran diagnostics. No external drives had been connected. No data had been transferred. It was clean. I stood in the center of the room, utterly bewildered. If she hadn't taken anything, what was the point? Why risk coming in here? My eyes scanned the room again, searching for anything out of place, and then I saw it. It was so small, so insignificant, I'd missed it completely. Tucked under the corner of my leather desk blotter was a small, folded piece of paper. It hadn't been there when I left. With a growing sense of dread, I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a photograph, a modern, high-resolution print. It showed a child, a boy of about 4 years old, laughing as he rode a small red tricycle. He had a mop of unruly blonde hair and bright, intelligent eyes that were staring directly at the camera. Staring directly at me. I had never seen this child before in my life, yet something about his smile was horribly, terrifyingly familiar. I stared at the photograph, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. The boy's smile. It was my smile. The same slightly crooked way my lip curled up on one side. It was the smile from my own childhood photos, the one my mother had always teased me about. But this wasn't me. I turned the photo over. Scrawled on the back in neat, feminine handwriting were 2 words. Find Daniel. Daniel. The name meant nothing to me. Yet, looking at this boy, a primal sense of recognition, of connection, vibrated deep within my bones. Who was he? And why was his picture under my blotter? Elara hadn't stolen anything from my office. She had delivered something. A message. A puzzle. This whole elaborate deception, Leo's performance, her infiltration of my life. It wasn't about money or revenge in the way I'd imagined. It was about this boy. My investigator's full report arrived the next morning. Elara wasn't the driver's wife or sister. She was his mother. His name was Thomas. a failed musician with a history of depression and alcoholism. Elara had spent years trying to get him help, but he always refused. The report also contained a detail that made my world tilt on its axis. Thomas had a son named Daniel. After the accident, after Thomas's death and my wife's, Daniel's mother, a woman Thomas had left years earlier, had a complete breakdown. She couldn't cope. Daniel, age 4, was placed into the foster care system, and then he vanished. The system lost him. A clerical error, a misplaced file, a child swallowed by the bureaucratic abyss. It all clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Elara wasn't seeking vengeance on me for her son's death. She held me no ill will. She was a grandmother who had lost the only 2 pieces of her son she had left. One was gone forever. The other was just lost. She had probably spent years searching, hitting the same brick walls I had with Leo's condition. And then she must have realized something. The system wouldn't help her. The police had closed the case, but there was one person with the resources, the power, and the motivation to find a lost child. The man whose life her son had irrevocably broken. Me. Her plan was insane, audacious, and brilliant. She couldn't just approach me. I would have thrown her out, seeing only the mother of the man who killed my wife. So she found my pressure point. My son. She must have studied us, learned about Leo's condition. The performance wasn't a malicious trick played on me. It was a desperate signal, a way to get my undivided attention, to prove she could do the impossible. By making me believe she held the key to unlocking Leo, she made herself indispensable. She forced me to dig into her past, knowing I would find the story of her grandson. The visit to my office wasn't a theft. It was the final move in her chess game. She planted the photograph, the final clue I needed to understand her true motive. And Leo, my son, my poor silent boy, he wasn't her accomplice. He was her audience. In a world of darkness and silence, Elara had been the first person to speak to him, not about him. She didn't see a patient. She saw a lonely child. She shared her own grief with him, whispering stories about her lost grandson Daniel. The performance she mentioned wasn't his mutism. It was his act of being completely unresponsive. For 4 years, Leo had been so terrified, so locked in by his trauma, that he had shut down every part of himself. Elara had simply given him a safe space to start moving again, even in secret. The handhold I saw on the monitor wasn't a sign of conspiracy. It was a flicker of trust, a boy in a dark room reaching for the only hand that had ever felt real. That night, I didn't go to my office. I walked to the kitchen where Elara was quietly washing the dinner dishes. I placed the photograph of Daniel on the counter beside her. She stopped, her hands submerged in the soapy water, but she didn't look at me. "He has your son's eyes," I said, my voice quiet. She finally turned to me, and the serene mask was gone. Her pale gray eyes were filled with a grief so profound it mirrored my own. She nodded, unable to speak. "Where did the system lose him?" I asked. In that moment we were no longer adversaries. We were 2 people bound together by a single tragic event, 2 survivors of a wreckage that had claimed our families. We were grandparents. It took me 3 weeks and a significant portion of my fortune. I unleashed my investigator and a team of the best skip tracers in the country. We tore through corrupted databases, bribed disgruntled clerks, and followed a cold trail across 3 states. We found him in a group home in rural Oregon, living under a different name. He had been bounced around so much that he barely remembered his own. I didn't go alone to get him. Elara sat beside me in the car as we drove up the gravel path to the unremarkable building that housed her grandson. When Daniel was brought out, a small, wary boy with my smile and his father's eyes, he looked from my face to Elara's. She knelt down, her face awash with tears. "Hello, Daniel," she whispered. "I'm your grandma, Elara. I've been looking for you for a very long time." We won custody. There was no one else left to fight for him. When we brought Daniel home, I carried him inside. Leo was in the living room, sitting in his usual chair. Elara had told him we were bringing a new friend. I knelt down in front of my son, with Daniel standing nervously beside me. "Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This is Daniel. He's going to be living with us now. He's your cousin." Leo sat perfectly still, his face an impassive mask. My heart sank. For a foolish moment, I thought this might be the miracle, the final key. Daniel, shy and overwhelmed, reached out a tentative hand and touched Leo's arm. "Hello," he whispered. And then it happened. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a dramatic cry. It was a sound so small, so fragile I almost missed it. A tiny, raspy whisper, the first word he had spoken in 4 years. "Hi." My breath caught in my throat. I looked at Ilara, who was openly weeping now, a smile breaking through her tears. Leo's head tilted slightly. A minuscule movement towards the sound of Daniel's voice. He didn't speak again that day, but it didn't matter. The first stone had been dislodged from the wall. The silence was no longer absolute. It had a crack in it, and for the first time in a very long time, a little bit of light was getting in. Our strange, broken family, forged from a tragedy that should have torn us apart, was finally beginning to heal.